I gave him the opportunity because I give it once, and that is the policy. And the policy exists for a reason. I am going to finish the engagement. What I am not required to do is prevent survival where survival is possible. Deploy your pods. Use whatever communication you have. Tell them to go dark and drift, low power, no active systems, away from the formation perimeter. The pods that do that will be fine. I almost asked her why she was telling me this. I stopped myself because the question felt ungrateful in a way I could not fully articulate, and because I thought I understood the answer. He was at the tactical display. He had heard the exchange. He looked at me for 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds I saw, in the face of a fleet commander who had never lost an engagement in 26. Not accepted it, there is a difference, but understood it. The understanding came without heat. It was very quiet. I think it was the kind of understanding that comes to a person who has been very good at something for a very long time and has just discovered. He said, "Deploy the pods." I deployed the pods. I also, using the Sorth 9's command integration network, pushed the survival station and pod deployment order to every hull in the formation. I do not know how many received it. I know how many followed it, because I have had time in this escape pod to observe the other pods in range and to count. 55 survivors across a theater that fielded 11,240 hulls. 55 who deployed in time or who were in positions that the engagement had not yet reached, or who read the order and moved fast enough. I want to note, for the processorate, Dorothy 1 did not deploy with them. What followed is documented in my log, and I will include the full log in this report. But I want to say here, for the record, what it was like. Because I was watching from a pod, not from the Sorth 9. Dorothy 1 ordered me off the carrier when the pods deployed, along with 2/3. He did not order himself off. He did not order Mech off. I would like the record to contain that. Mech stayed. The senior tactical staff stayed. Dorothy 1 stayed at the tactical display, and he did not look at me when I left, and I did not say anything when I left because there was nothing. I watched from the pod. The Gravenmoor was, for the next 4 hours and 6 minutes, the most deliberate thing I have ever seen. It did not rush. It did not, and I want to be very specific about this, because it matters. It did not rampage. It was not a thing out of control, not a force of chaos, not the kind of weapon that burns indiscriminately. It was specific. It was careful about what it chose and in what order it chose it. It worked through the formation with a patience that I found, from the distance of the escape pod, almost peaceful to watch in the particular way. Combat hulls first, then the elements that were sustaining them, then the command nodes. And through all of it, a consistent pattern of, I want to use the correct word, consideration for the survival platforms. The escape pods that had dispersed from the swarm before and during the engagement were not targeted, not once. In 4 hours and 6 minutes of continuous weapons activity across a debris field that eventually extended across 300,000 kilometers. I had a great deal of time to count. Hull silence events, steady, continuous, specific. The formation's coherence degraded past the point of coordinated function at approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes into the engagement. The coherence index, which I had continued logging from the pod's passive sensors, crossed the threshold that doctrine classifies as operationally. The Gravenmoor had known this, had worked toward it, had systematically removed the connective tissue of the formation before addressing the individual hulls, which meant that by the 3-hour mark, 6,940 hulls had gone silent. I want to describe the experience of watching this from the pod, because I think it is relevant to the processorate's understanding of what this ship. Watching from the pod, the formation looked, from a distance, like something structural collapsing, not a battle exactly, but a building coming. The coherent shape of the nested arcs was visible from the pod's optical array, and so was the progressive loss of that coherence element. I have seen engagement recordings before. I have reviewed hundreds of them in my career. Engagement recordings look like combat. They look like weapons fire and evasive maneuvering and the clash of opposing forces. This did not look like that. This looked like the Gravenmoor working. That is the only way I can describe it. It was methodical in a way that had from this distance and angle the quality of something entirely routine. The Gravenmoor moved when it needed to move and fired when it needed to fire, and the formation responded the way formations respond to a force they. The silence came in clusters, 5 and 6 holes at a time in the later phases, and each cluster of silence was followed by the Gravenmoor moving. I noted the time at each cluster of 5 or more simultaneous silences. I noted the pattern. I could not, even with all the time I had to watch and to think, predict where the next cluster would fall. The Gravenmoor's targeting logic was not random, but it was not any logic I had in the library, and watching it work from outside, trying. By 3.5 hours, 9,211. At 3 hours and 58 minutes, the Sorith 9 went silent. I noted it in the log. I wrote the timestamp and the hull designation and the silence classification marker. Then I sat with the log open, and I did not write anything else for 6 minutes, which is unprofessional and which I am noting in this report. At 4 hours and 12 minutes, the Gravenmoor's weapons systems returned to standby configuration. The engagement was over. I remained in the escape pod for 63 hours until a Terran recovery vessel arrived to collect the pods that were broadcasting survival. There were 11 other pods within signal range of mine. The recovery vessel found 43 more during the sweep, 55 Keth survivors, out of 11,240 holes, plus the crew of the Sorith 9. 55. I filed the number in my log while the recovery vessel was still running its sweep. I filed it carefully, and I did not abbreviate it. I did not write it as a ratio or a percentage or a fraction of the total because reducing it to a ratio felt like a way of making the number smaller. That is the only word I have for what I watched it do. The recovery vessel's crew was professional. They provided us with medical assessment, food, and separate quarters. They did not speak to us beyond what was necessary for our care, and we did not speak to them. They were not unkind. They were the kind of people who understood that their job in that moment was to do the job and not to add to it by requiring any performance. At the 41st hour of transit back toward Terran space, we were being transported, presumably, for whatever the Terran Consolidation navies. The crew member said, "She wants to know if you want a copy of the engagement record?" I thought about this for a moment. Then I said, "Yes." The crew member brought me a data card. On it was a complete record of the engagement from the Gravenmoor's sensor perspective, not its tactical data, not its weapons analysis, but the raw. Cross-referenceable against my own log at every point where my log has an entry. I have been through it 11 times on this transit. It matches my own log at every point. It fills in the gaps where my log went dark with the same precision my log has where it was running. I am including it in this report as an attachment. The thing I keep returning to, reading the Gravenmoor's engagement record, is a sequence that begins at 7 minutes into the engagement. The Gravenmoor's sensor log shows the departure of the first survival pods from the Sorith 9, the general survival station deployment I had. The sensor log notes them, all of them. The targeting system flags each one individually as it flags every object in the engagement zone. And then, for each pod, the targeting system removes the flag and records in the notation protocol that is apparently standard on Terran Naval. The translation is, "Not a threat, stand clear." That notation was applied to every survival pod that departed every hull in the engagement zone. Not just ours, not just the Sorith 9, every pod from every hull across the entire engagement. The Gravenmoor tracked them all, individually, throughout 4 hours and 12 minutes of continuous weapons activity and applied the same. I have been trying across 63 hours in an escape pod and 41 hours in a recovery vessel cabin to find a frame of reference that makes. I have not found one in the Keth Tactical Library. The Keth Swarm's engagement doctrine does not have a provision for tracking enemy survival pods and removing them from the targeting queue. The doctrine does not need such a provision because the doctrine does not distinguish, in active engagement, between a target that is fighting. All targets within the engagement zone are engagement targets until the engagement concludes. The Gravenmoor had 71 years to develop its doctrine without anyone watching. This is what it developed. Not just the weapons range and the maneuvering capability and the targeting systems and the hull refits. All of that is explicable in terms. This is the other thing, the policy, the one-time offer, the deliberate tracking of survival pods across 4 hours of engagement. The specific choice, made and maintained, about the difference between a hull that is fighting and a person who has stopped fighting. I do not know what to do with this. I do not know how to file it in a way that the processorate will find actionable, because the processorate's frameworks are built. What the Gravenmoor did is not in the library. What Captain Solen said on the channel about giving the offer once, about the policy existing for a reason, that is not in the library either. We do not have language for an enemy that distinguishes between those things. I know that I'm going to file it accurately, the way I should have filed the archive entry accurately 71 years ago when someone should have. I know that when I get to wherever the Terrans are taking me, I'm going to request a conversation with whoever their documentation people are, and I'm going to ask this with a very specific feeling in my chest that I did not have before the morning of the contact. A feeling for which the Keth do not have an exact word. The closest approximation in the old vocabulary is the cold that comes after you have been laughing very loudly in a place where you should have been. The cold that settles when the laughter ends and you understand too clearly and too late what the sounds in that place actually were. The recovery vessel came out of transit drive 4 hours ago. Through the portal in my cabin, I can see a station, large, functional, utilitarian in the Terran way, none of the aesthetic embellishment. Some of those bays have ships in them. I have been trying, from this distance, to identify the class profiles. I can see 3 hulls of the Gravenmoor class. Not 1, 3. They are all lit, every port, active station illumination, the engine glow of vessels at combat readiness. They are not identical to the Gravenmoor, not in the way ships from the same class usually look similar. Each one has the mismatched plating. Each one looks different in the details. Each one looks old and functional and completely awake. Each one has, I can see from here, the same kind of deep scoring along the forward sections that Mech identified on the Gravenmoor, the layered. I have checked the archive entry for the Gravenmoor class. There were 4 hulls launched, of which 3 were listed as decommissioned and 1, the Gravenmoor, was listed as assumed scrapped. The entry lists the class as extinct. I am looking at 3 hulls that the archive says do not exist. There are presumably 4. I am going to file an updated entry when I get access to a terminal. I'm going to update it to reflect what is currently in front of me, which is, I am going to open every Terran naval hull entry that is currently classified as decommissioned or scrapped or assumed scrapped or archive status. I will log the contact. I will log it carefully with the correct numbers, and I will not abbreviate any of them, and I will not write the glyph for a joke that isn't worth. The Gravenmoor didn't notice us. That is the most accurate summary I can write for the opening line of this report. 11,240 hulls, plus 1 command carrier with its full complement, the largest single theater deployment in this. It is out there now, somewhere in the patrol sector. It has been working for 9 years without anyone watching, doing whatever the Terran. And there are 3 more like it at this station, and presumably they have patrol sectors too, and presumably we do not know which sectors those are. We sent 11,000 ships, 55 came back. I do not know what number they would need to send to get a different result. I suspect this is a calculation the Terrans have already done. I suspect they arrived at a number and found it satisfactory and went back to work. I suspect they have been back at work for a very long time, and that the work is the kind of work that does not require witnesses, and that they were. That is the only lesson I have to offer the processorate, and I offer it at the cost of 11,000 hulls and 1 fleet commander who stayed. The contact came in at the 3rd interval of the Deep Watch cycle, and I remember laughing. That is what I keep coming back to. Not the hull signature, not the weapons analysis, not even the archive entry that should have made me pause. I keep coming back to the laugh. The way it moved through the command gallery of the Keth battle carrier Sorith 9 like a slow wave, starting at the scan station. The kind that comes from the belly and costs you breath. I can still hear it if I close my eyes. The archive entry read, Terran Dreadnought classes vessel, hull designation Gravenmoor, age profile 94 Terran years, armament listed. Last logged position, Terran Reclamation Yard Sector Ninetine. Threat Assessment Relic, classification, non-combat. That was what I read. That was what I filed. And in the margin of my own assessment report, in the shorthand the Keth use for obvious conclusions, I wrote the glyph that translates most cleanly. I want to be precise about this, because precision is what the high processorate is going to demand from me, and because I have had a great deal. Precision means the archive said decommissioned, and I believed it. Precision means Tactical Ordnance Mech said the ship's drive signature was consistent with a transit range vessel making a positioning run, not. Precision means Fleet Commander Dorith 1 looked at the contact data and said, and I am quoting from my own log here, "Send 4 wings. I want it for the entry hall." Precision means we thought it was a joke. I need to tell this in the order it happened, because the processorate will want to reconstruct the sequence, and because I owe it to the 11. I owe Dorith 1 that, though he will not be filing any reports of his own. So, from the beginning, the Keth swarm does not operate in the way that most spacefaring species understand fleet operations. Most species assemble a fleet the way you assemble an argument, carefully, piece by piece, with attention to what each component adds. The Keth swarm assembles a fleet the way water fills a container. We go until there is no more room. This is not an exaggeration, and it is not a boast. The swarm's operational doctrine, refined across 400 years of territorial expansion, is built on a single and irreducible premise. When you have 11,000 ships available to a single theater engagement, the question of tactics becomes largely academic. You are not selecting an approach. You are selecting how quickly you want the outcome. This doctrine had served us across 1,100 documented engagements. I want to establish this clearly for the processorate and for myself, because what I am about to describe is easier to understand if you understand. We believed it because it was true. We had tested it across 400 years and 1,100 engagements, and not once had the doctrine failed. There is no asterisk in the record. There is no engagement that the Keth swarm entered and did not win. This is not the kind of record that makes you arrogant. Exactly, arrogance implies a choice. The full numeral. In a theater that had fielded 11,240 hulls and a command carrier with a full crew complement. This is the kind of record that makes you certain, which is a different thing. We were certain. I was certain. The certainty was in the archive, and the archive was in my hands. And when the archive said a ship was a decommissioned relic of 94 years, that is what I want the processorate to understand. Not that we were careless, that we were wrong in the specific way you are wrong when you have been right for so long that the machinery of being right stops asking whether it. Dorith 1 had not dispatched 11,000 hulls to the contact, of course. That would have been wasteful. And the Keth are not wasteful. He sent 4 wings of the 13th Interceptor Cluster, 240 light pursuit hulls, because the contact was a single ship. Some of the interceptor pilots had begun placing bets on the transit time. I know this because I heard them over the open channel, which I had left running because there was nothing about this contact that suggested I should. The first anomaly came at 11 minutes after the 13th made visual contact. Mahik read it to me from the scan station. He was not laughing anymore. He was reading the way Keth officers read, when the numbers are not cooperating, carefully, syllable by syllable, as though the deliberateness. I am showing a weapon's signature from the contact that is not consistent with the archive entry. Define inconsistent, I said. I was not alarmed. I was mildly irritated, the way you are when administrative error intrudes on what should be a routine morning. The archive lists the Gravenmoor class as carrying 8 medium-yield kinetic projectors and a standard point defense lattice, Mech said. What I am currently reading is, he stopped. He rechecked the screen. He ran the calibration subroutine, which takes 4 seconds, and I watched him do it, because his hesitation was beginning to interest me. What I am reading does not match an 8-projector profile. What does it match? He told me. I looked at the number he gave me and I said, that is not possible. That is not a number a ship of that hull age carries. No, Mech said, it is not. I cross-referenced the archive entry. Gravenmoor-class dreadnoughts had been designed 94 years ago by a Terran naval program that the Keth had assessed at the time as promising. The class had launched 4 vessels, of which 3 had been decommissioned within 40 years due to maintenance costs, and the 4th. The archive assessment from the time read, disposal pending. The most recent entry, filed 71 Terran years ago, read, assumed scrapped, archive status, closed, 71 years. The archive had been closed on this ship for 71 years. I want to stay with that number for a moment, because the processorate is going to want to know at what point in the sequence there was. The entry was closed because it was inconvenient to maintain. The Terran reclamation yards are not Keth installations, and Keth access to them is not guaranteed, and verifying the disposal of a single. Someone decided the probability of error was low and closed the entry and moved to the next item on the list. 71 years. Get me a visual, I said. The visual came through at approximately the same moment the first wing of the 13th Interceptor cluster engaged. Engage is perhaps the wrong word. They entered firing range and opened with a standard suppression pattern, the kind the Keth used to establish immediate physical dominance. 240 light pursuit hulls, their weapons systems live, forming the standard encirclement pattern that the Keth had used successfully. This was not a superior numbers situation, this was one ship. The visual I received showed the Gravenmoor from approximately 800 kilometers, a distance the optical array could close to ship distal. I remember staring at the image and understanding, for the first time, that the archive had been wrong about something more basic than the weapons. The ship was not a decommissioned relic. I do not mean that it was operational. I mean that whatever had been done to it in 71 years of absence from the Keth archive had changed it. The hull was old. You could see the age in the plate coloration, the dark striations where the alloy had oxidized across decades of operation. The scoring along the forward quarter was deep and old and spoke of engagements that the Keth had no record of. But the hull was not the thing that made me stop breathing. The thing that made me stop breathing was that the ship was awake. Every port across that ancient hull was lit. Not the scattered, low-level lighting of a ship running minimal systems, the full active station illumination of a vessel at combat readiness. The engine ports at the stern were running at an output that, when Meek converted it to a thrust number, produced another figure that did not match. The drive systems had been replaced, not upgraded in the incremental way that a Navy upgrades a hull to extend service life, but replaced, rebuilt, refitted, updated with technology. The ship that had entered the Terran reclamation yard 71 years ago had come back out as something the archive had no category for. It had come back out as something the archive could not find, because the archive had stopped looking. I studied the hull plating in the visual feed for longer than was strictly productive, because there was something in the way it looked that I kept. The scoring I mentioned, the deep striations along the forward quarter, was not uniform. It was not the consistent damage and repair pattern of a ship that has been in one or two major engagements. It was layered. Striations over striations, the older ones partially repaired and then scored again, the pattern repeating across decades. I am not a weapons analyst, but Make leaned over my shoulder at one point and pointed to a section of the hull near the starboard bow and said, very quietly, "Fleet designate. Do you see the depth of those channels?" I saw them. That scoring is from kinetic impacts of a yield our heaviest siege weapons produce, Mech said, repeated, multiple engagements. At minimum 4 separate instances of significant kinetic bombardment, each of which would have required a weapon of our heavy siege class or larger. This ship has been hit by weapons of our tier, repeatedly, across what looks like he did the calculation on the age profiles of the oxidation. He told me the number. The Gravenmoor had been taking hits from weapons of Keth heavy siege yield repeatedly for approximately 60 years, and it was still flying. I did not include this in my log at the time. I do not have a good explanation for why I did not include it. I think the honest answer is that I did not know how to file a data point that did not fit into any category the log was built to contain, and this was a professional error, and I am noting it here. Fleet designate, Mech said. His voice had changed. The 13th is not suppressing. I watched the suppression pattern on the tactical display. The 13th Interceptor cluster had deployed correctly, the encirclement forming with the precision that 240 experienced pursuit. The weapons systems of 240 light pursuit hulls had opened fire on a single contact at the correct range and with the correct yield. The Gravenmoor had not suppressed. It had rolled. The ship was a dreadnought, a class of vessel that in Keth doctrine does not maneuver in the early stages of an engagement because dreadnoughts do. They are the fixed point around which the engagement turns. But the Gravenmoor moved with an ease that was wrong for its size, a lateral roll that carried the forward quarter out of the heaviest concentration. It was not a maneuver I recognized from the Keth tactical library. It was something older than that, something the Terrans had apparently been practicing with this hull for 71 years without anyone watching. The first Keth hull went silent 32 seconds into the engagement. I did not know, in that moment, that it was the first. I thought it was a malfunction. I thought the pilot had experienced a drive failure or a power cascade, the kind of random mechanical misfortune that statistics guarantee will. I noted it in the log as a probable equipment failure and waited for the suppression pattern to close. The second hull went silent at 38 seconds. The third at 41. Fleet designate, Mech said. He said it very quietly. He said it the way you say something when you already know the answer will not help you. I see it, I said. The Gravenmoor's port array was firing in a sequence I had never encountered in the Keth tactical database, and I had access to 1100. The sequence was not random, and it was not the standard Terran doctrine we had on file. The doctrine was 94 years old. The doctrine was. Whatever doctrine the Gravenmoor was operating under had been written for the weapon systems it actually carried, for the drive capability it. By the 2-minute mark, 19 hulls of the 13th had gone silent. I want to be specific about what this looked like on the tactical display, because the processorate is going to want to understand the progression. The display shows each hull in the engagement as a point of light. Active hull, a solid point. Silent hull, a different marker, a dimmer one, that the system assigns when a hull stops broadcasting across all channels simultaneously. When the third hull went silent, I had 3 dim points on a display that had started with 243. The display looked largely unchanged. There was no sense of cascading failure. There was no visible catastrophe. There were just fewer lights. Mayhek began reading the silence count aloud, the way Keth scan officers read when they are trying to impose order on something that is not cooperating. Every 30 seconds he gave me the current number. At 60 seconds, 22 silenced. At 90 seconds, 31. At 2 minutes, 44. At 2.5 minutes, 58. At 3 minutes, Make stopped reading the numbers aloud. I asked him why. He said, because the rate is increasing, fleet designate, and I do not know how to read it in a useful way anymore. I can give you the count, but I cannot give you what is supposed to go after the count. I said, read it anyway. At the 4-minute mark, 73 hulls had gone silent. At 5 minutes, 91. The Gravenmoor had rolled twice more since the initial maneuver, each time moving with that wrong ease, each time bringing a different array. The encirclement that had been crisp and correct at the moment of engagement was ragged now, gaps where silenced hulls had been the surviving. By the 2-minute mark, Fleet Commander Dorth 1 came to the scan station personally, which he had not done since the veteran engagement 6 years. He looked at the tactical display. He looked at the Gravenmoor on the visual feed. The ship turning again with that wrong for its size ease. The weapons arrays cycling. He looked at the growing list of silenced hulls on the communications board. How? He said. He said only that one word. I told him what Mech had told me. The archive entry, the weapons profile that did not match, the drive systems that had been replaced, the 71-year gap, the hull scoring that Mech had identified as consistent with repeated heavy siege bombardment across 6 decades of engagement. I told him all of it in the order it had come to me, and I watched his face while I told him. And his face was the face of someone who is very good. When I finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, recall the 13th and send me the full battle swarm. I want to stop here, because the processorate is going to ask me whether I advised against this, and I want the record to be accurate. I did not advise against it. I am a fleet designate, a documentation officer, an assessment and record specialist. I file what I see, and I provide the commanders with analysis. It was not my place to tell Dorth 1 that sending 11,000 hulls against one ship was a decision I was uncertain about, partly because 11,000 hulls is 11,000 hulls. The Keth swarm had never, in 400 years of expansion, in 1,100 documented engagements, lost a battle in which it had deployed. The doctrine said this was impossible. I filed the recall order for the 13th. I filed the deployment order for the full swarm. I noted in the log, with what I recognize now as a very specific kind of professional blindness, that the Gravenmoor had silenced 100. I wrote that number and I thought, that is catastrophic for a collection run, but not for a full battle swarm engagement. The swarm would absorb the loss of 109 light pursuit hulls the way the ocean absorbs a handful of stones. 109 out of 11,243 is a number so small it does not round to anything. I was right. That is precisely what it was. A number so small it did not round to anything. The rounding error was mine. The full battle swarm of the Keth 13th Theater Command comprises 11,240 hulls across 7 force classes. It is the largest single theater deployment the Keth swarm maintains in this sector, assembled here because this sector contains 3 inhabited. The swarm had not fired its weapons in 8 months. The crews were experienced, the hulls were maintained, and the doctrine was airtight. It takes 37 minutes for a full battle swarm to assemble from dispersed patrol positions into combat formation. The Gravenmoor did not wait. I do not fully understand, even now, how the Gravenmoor's sensors could have given it accurate targeting data for a dispersed formation. The Keth countermeasure suite is rated to defeat targeting systems 2 generations more advanced than anything the archive had listed as operational. I say this not to excuse what happened, but to explain why I could not understand it as it was happening, why I kept expecting the situation. The numbers did not cooperate. The first heavy siege hull went silent while the swarm was still forming. It was Cluster 9 of the 7th Siege Division, which had been holding a patrol position approximately 12,000 kilometers from the contact. It was not a hull in the engagement area. It was not a hull that should have been targetable by a ship the size of the Gravenmoor at that range with any weapon system the archive had on file. The silence lasted 4 seconds, and then the pilot of Cluster 9's bridge, secondary, sent a transmission that consisted entirely of the Keth word. It is an archaic word. We teach it in schools as an artifact of old Keth cosmology. I had never heard it used in an operational channel. Then Cluster 9 went permanently silent. I noted it in the log. I did not know how to categorize it, so I wrote anomalous contact loss and moved to the next item on my board, because the next item was the recall. I told Dorothy I was working on a revised estimate. He said, "Work faster." The second heavy siege loss came 4 minutes later. The third came 90 seconds after that. These were not patrol position hulls. By now the formation was assembling and the siege division had moved into its designated arc position. The range had decreased and the losses had not stopped. This was important data. I filed it as important data. I did not, in this filing, include a commentary on what it implied, because the commentary would have been that the range limitation we had assumed. Filing that commentary would have required me to file, attached to it, the statement that I had no basis for confidence in any of the numbers I was. At the 18-minute mark, with the swarm still completing its formation, 43 hulls had gone silent. They were not all in the same location. 7 were forward assault elements. 4 were logistics defense platforms. 8 were medium assault hulls from Cluster 11 of the Assault Division, which had moved to intercept the Gravenmoor when it began repositioning. 11 were light pursuit wings from 3 different cluster commands, which suggested that the repositioning had not been what it appeared to be. I noted that last item 3 times, crossing it out twice and rewriting it, because the Keth swarm's dreadnought analogs are the heaviest hulls. I rewrote it the 3rd time and left it in the log, because the log is the log and it does not care what the archive says is possible. I sat with the number for a moment. 7 dreadnought analogs. Each one, a hull class that in the Keth Tactical Library requires a coordinated attack by no fewer than 12 heavy siege ships to defeat at standard. Silenced by a single contact operating at ranges our doctrine, classified as impossible. Make, I said, yes, fleet designate. Is there any possibility the countermeasure suite is producing false positive silence readings? Any electromagnetic phenomenon in this sector that could be generating false hull loss signals? Mech was quiet for a moment. He ran the background noise analysis. He calibrated against the sector's standard interference profile. He checked 3 times because he is thorough and because he knew what I was hoping he would find. He did not find it. No, fleet designate, he. Dorothy 1 called me at the 23-minute mark, Vorth 7, he said. He used my full designation, which he had not done since my commission. I want your honest assessment. Not the archive, not the doctrine, what you see. This is the part of the report I have written and deleted 4 times. I have deleted it because it is going to sound, in retrospect, like the kind of thing a fleet designate says when he is trying to protect his record. I am going to include it anyway, because the High Processorate asked for honesty, and because Dorth 1 asked for it first, and he deserved it. I told him, "Commander, I believe we have an incomplete archive entry. I believe the Gravenmoor has been modified to a specification we have no record of. I believe its weapons range exceeds anything we can verify. Its drive performance exceeds the archive by a margin I cannot calculate without better. And I think," I said, "that it has been this way for a very long time, and that we should have known, and that we did not know because the archive. I do not make tactical recommendations." I said, "Commander, that is outside my Voris 7. His voice was very level. "What do you recommend?" I looked at the tactical display. I looked at the 43 silenced hulls, then 51, the count updating while I held the channel open. I looked at the Gravenmoor on the visual feed, still moving with that wrong ease, the weapons cycling, the formation shifting around it in the way. I looked at the swarm, 11,000 hulls, still forming, enormous, overwhelming, the largest deployed force in this sector, the force that had. "I recommend we attempt to open a communication channel before the formation is complete," I said, "and that we use the channel to request clarification on the Gravenmoor's operational status, on the grounds that we may have acted on an outdated—" "You think one ship is going to talk to us," Dorth 1 said. "I think," I said, "that it has not destroyed us yet, and that this may be significant." What I meant, what I did not say, because saying it felt like a weight I was not authorized to place on the record, was that the Gravenmoor had the largest hull in the battle swarm, the one with the command-integrated systems, the one whose loss would degrade the swarm's coordination. If the Gravenmoor wanted the Sorith 9, it had had 19 minutes to take it. It had not taken it. I did not know what this meant. I still do not know, with certainty, what this meant. But it was a data point, and I had very few data points that were not attached to silence, and I held onto it. Dorth 1 opened the communication channel. The Gravenmoor answered on the first signal interval. I have the transcript in my records. I am including it here because the processorate will want it, and because I have read it 67 times in this escape pod, and I am still not. Sorith 9 Command. This is Fleet Commander Dorth 1 of the Keth 13th Theater Command, transmitting on the recognized emergency contact. We are requesting clarification of your operational status and of the events of the past 23 minutes. This is the detail that the processorate is going to find most interesting, and I want to be precise. The Gravenmoor altered its movement pattern. We believe there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the nature of our initial approach to your vessel. Gravenmoor, Fleet Commander. This is Captain Adara Solen of the Terran Consolidation Navy, commanding vessel Gravenmoor. I have received your recall signal to your interceptor units. I have also received your deployment orders for your full theater command. I want to be very direct with you, because I find that directness saves a great deal of time. Sorith 9 Command, we are listening. Gravenmoor, your archive has us listed as decommissioned. I understand that. We went to the reclamation yard. What happened after that is not something we publicized, because we did not see the need. The Gravenmoor was not scrapped. It was refitted. It was refitted again. It has been refitted 7 times in 71 years, because the Terran Consolidation Navy takes the position that a good hull is worth keeping. We are in your space because we are on a patrol assignment. Fleet Commander, we patrol this sector. We have been patrolling this sector for 9 years without incident, and I would like this to continue being without incident where possible. A silence on the Keth side. Dorth 1 had covered his microphone, and I could hear him speaking to someone, but I could not hear what he said. Gravenmoor, Fleet Commander, I want to give you an opportunity to stand your swarm down. I want to be clear that I am offering this not because I have any uncertainty about what the next several hours will look like if you do not. You sent 240 ships to collect my hull number for your entry hall. I understand that was the order given, and it reflects what the archive told you about me. The archive was wrong. I would like us to proceed from that acknowledgement. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Sorith 9 a Command. I understand that you are a single vessel. Gravenmoor. Yes, I am. Sorith 9 a Command, and you are suggesting that a single vessel, Gravenmoor, Fleet Commander. Your formation has 11,000 holes. I am aware of this. I would ask you to be aware in turn that 11,000 holes has not been a number that changed the quality of this conversation in the past. I am not saying this to be threatening. I am saying it because I believe you are a person who understands numbers, and that numbers may be useful here where other arguments have not been. I am asking you clearly and directly to stand your swarm down and withdraw from this sector. I am asking once. I want that on the record because the record matters to me. I am asking once. The communication channel remained open for 4 more seconds. I watched the tactical display. I watched the swarm formation completing its final positions. 11,000 hulls locking into the nested arc deployment that is the Keth swarms. Doroth 1 did not stand the swarm down. I could reconstruct the reasoning. I have, in this escape pod, spent considerable time reconstructing it. 11,000 hulls is 11,000 hulls. The doctrine says what it says. A fleet commander who has won every engagement he has ever entered does not, at the moment when the largest force in his theater is fully assembled. That is not how a fleet commander with 26 years of unbroken success maintains 26 years of unbroken success. He believed the doctrine. I would have believed it too. I believe I did believe it, right up until the moment the channel closed. The Gravenmoor's weapons systems went to full active at the 4-minute 12-second mark of the engagement with the full swarm. I know the exact time because I was logging continuously at that point, and I have the timestamp in the record. I am going to try to describe what happened next in a way that is useful to the processorate. I find this difficult, not because my memory of it is unclear. My memory of it is very clear, in the way that memories are clear when every detail. The nested arc formation works on the principle of layered engagement zones. The inner arc engages the target at close range with maximum weapon density. The outer arcs provide suppressive fire that degrades the target's ability to maneuver and respond to the inner arc. The carrier and command elements position inside the formation, protected by the density of hulls around them. The logistics platforms maintain position at the formation's edges, supporting the combat elements. The formation is, in doctrine, self-reinforcing. Damage to one element is absorbed by adjacent elements without loss of overall capability, because the doctrine was written for a target that could be attrited. The Gravenmoor could not be attrited, not by us, not with the weapons we had. The Keth swarm's standard weapons profiles are rated against published Terran hull specifications, and the Gravenmoor's hull specifications had not. Whatever the Gravenmoor's shielding and hull plating actually consisted of after 7 refits across 71 years, it was not what the archive. This is not a statement I make lightly. 11,000 hulls firing in coordinated sequence should have been able to defeat any single target in the engagement zone inside the first 20. This is not a theoretical claim. This is what the doctrine says, and the doctrine is based on 1,100 engagements, and it was wrong. The Gravenmoor survived the first 20 minutes. It survived them while moving, while firing, and I watched this on the tactical display, and I could not explain it, and I cannot fully explain it now, while doing something. Element by element, arc by arc, the Gravenmoor worked through the formation with the unhurried efficiency of something that has done this kind. That was the thing that was hardest to watch. That was the thing that made Mech stop reading the scan data aloud and start simply marking it. The Gravenmoor was choosing which elements to silence in which order, and the order was making the formation less coherent in ways that took me too. It was doing to us what a practiced hand does to a complex mechanism. Finding the load-bearing pieces, not the most visible ones, and removing them. At the 30-minute mark of the full engagement, 482 hulls had gone silent. I filed the number. I noted the formation coherence degradation index, which the tactical system calculates automatically and which had moved into the amber range. I flagged the targeting pattern as non-standard and beyond my current ability to predict. I sent the analysis to Doroth 1. At the 31-minute mark, Doroth 1 moved the Sorath 9, not toward the Gravenmoor, away from it, a repositioning deeper into the formation, a placing of additional hull mass between the command carrier and the contact. This is a recognized defensive maneuver in Keth doctrine, appropriate when a command element believes its position has been identified and targeted. I also understood, though I did not log this part, that moving a command carrier during an active engagement is the kind of decision. Not immediately, There was a delay of approximately 40 seconds, which may have been sensor processing time or may have been something else. The change in the Gravenmoor's vector was subtle, a degree of heading correction that would not have registered as significant if I had not been. It was not moving toward the Soreth 9. It was moving to a position from which the Soreth 9 would be accessible. It was planning ahead, through the formation that was between them, as though the formation were a medium it was moving through rather than, as though the 11,000 hulls were not a barrier but a distance, and the Gravenmoor was simply calibrating for the time the distance would take. I opened a second communication channel. I want to be clear that I did not have the authority to do this. I am a fleet designate, a documentation officer. Opening communication channels during an active engagement is a command function. I opened it anyway, because the only alternative was to continue filing hull silence counts, and the hull silence counts were no longer providing. I opened the channel, and I said, without a prepared statement, without running it past anyone, Gravenmoor, this is Fleet Designate Vorith 7. I filed the archive assessment that described you as a relic and a non-threat. I want you to know that I am aware that assessment was incorrect. The channel was open for 3 seconds. Then, Captain Solen said, Fleet Designate, are you attempting to negotiate? No, I said. I have no authority to negotiate. I was attempting to... I stopped. I thought about what I was actually doing. I was attempting to be honest, I said. Because I looked at the archive entry and I laughed, and I wanted someone to know that I know that was wrong. A pause. In the background of the channel, I could hear the ambient sound of a working bridge, the quiet cycling of systems, a crew going about its work. Oh, is your command carrier intact? Solen asked. Yes, I said. Are the crew at survival stations? I had not ordered that. I should have ordered that much earlier. I put out the general order for survival station readiness on the Soreth 9's internal channel while I was still holding the communication line. That was the right thing to do, Solen said. I would suggest you also deploy your escape pods to safe distance from the formation. Not for the command carrier only, for all surviving hulls you can reach in the next 20 minutes. Get the word out if your communication nets are still functional. Captain, I said. Are you Fleet Designate? She said. Your commander declined to stand down.